Good evening, everyone. My name is Firoza Godrej, and I'm a board member of the Asia Society India Centre since its founding 16 years ago. Asia Society's programs across our 14 centres are now virtual and global. We have hosted more than 600 programs during this lockdown, including some very interesting discussions on food security, public health, and world politics. They are all available on our YouTube page. So do go ahead and view these webinars whenever you have the time. Our discussion today on Prejudice to Pride, LGBTQ inclusion in the Indian workplace. We look forward at corporate India's move towards a more inclusive workplace, promoting diversity and adopting LGBTQ-friendly policies. Post the partial discrimination of Section 377 by the Honorable Supreme Court in 2018, we have witnessed an attitudinal change towards acceptance and inclusion of the LGBTQ community in India. We now have a Transgender Persons Act, which not only protects the rights of transgender people, but also provides for their welfare and other related matters. However, there is a significant room to cover an area of anti-discrimination laws, equal rights of marriage and inheritance, and workplace inclusion. Parmesh's book, Queeristan, provides us with a blueprint and proven strategies on how to get inclusion right. Introducing the active recruitment of LGBTQ individuals and bringing in queer-friendly policies could be a very good start. However, efforts need to move from mere symbolism to actual action for building equality in every sense. Today's discussion will enlighten us on the way ahead for LGBTQ inclusion at Indian workplaces. Radhika Piramal, I welcome you, Executive Director and Vice Chairperson of VIP Industries, who will be making the closing remarks. Allow me to introduce our esteemed guests this evening. Parmesh, I welcome you. Parmesh Shahani, as everyone knows, is the founder of the Godrej India Culture Lab, Mumbai. He is a member of the FICCI Task Force on Diversity and Inclusion and a board member of Khoj International Artists Association. He has been a TED Senior Fellow, a Yale World Fellow, and a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. I welcome Aparna Mittal, who is a leading equality, diversity, and inclusion advisor and corporate lawyer with over 16 years of experience. She is the founder of Samāna Centre for Gender Policy Law that brings in a unique perspective of diversity work spanning across impact investing, workplace diversity, equity and inclusion, and anti-discrimination policies, among others. I welcome Amita, Karadkhedkar. She is Vice President, Site Head at Citibank, Pune. She has been a TEDx speaker and an inclusion and diversity advocate to more than 20 MNCs. Amita has spoken on LGBTQ inclusion at several prestigious forums, such as IIM Bodh Gaya, NASSCOM in 2018, Out and Equal India Forum, SHRM 2018, and Pune Connect 2019, among others. Now, just a minute for a little bit of housekeeping before we proceed. All those who are joining us on Zoom, please leave your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat box. For our audiences on Facebook, please drop them in the comments section. I would now like to invite Parmesh to commence the discussion, have a very, very good deliberation, And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Parmesh, over to you.
Thanks so much, Firoza. How lovely. I'm just going to make very brief opening remarks because I know Amita has a lot of questions and we want to make it super conversational. So thank you to everyone who's watching. Thank you to the Asia Society. Absolutely love you and everything that you do. And to our incredible panel, all of who are actually in the book. So everyone on this panel is a character in the book, whether it's Amita, whether it's Radhika, and whether it's Aparna as well. All of you, your work and your organizations are all featured in the book in different chapters. So it's an absolute pleasure to be sharing this virtual stage with everyone. I just want to give you a very quick overview of the book for the few who've been living under a rock who haven't read it so far. It's a book which is deeply personal. It's a memoir meets manifesto. Um, it has 5 sections, and I wrote it with great intent. Right, everything around this book is very has been carefully thought of because it's written as both a flashback at what's happened, but also very much as a manifesto and as a tool that multiple audiences can use. Queer people as well as straight people, business people, students, the general public, etc., to bring about the change that we need to bring about. Firoza said in the opening remarks that the 2018 Supreme Court verdict on 377 was an important milestone. But that milestone only decriminalized being LGBTQ. Between that decriminalization and total equality, there is still a long way to go. And I've written Queeristan, hopefully as a manual that will help us go on that journey as well. So it's got deeply personal stories. I write about history of our multiple histories, our multiple queer histories. I write about the law. I write about the importance of family. There's a lot of masala in it, love lives, our personal stories interwoven around a broad business case of why inclusion is important from various angles, the various steps that any organization can take on that inclusion journey as well. And it's been deeply inspired by the people on this panel and so many others as well, LGBTQ people as well as allies. It's got numbers as well as stories, and it primarily argues that being inclusive is very much part of Indian culture as well. It's not something that has tapcofied from anywhere else. It is in our inherent rootedness and it's in our culture to be inclusive. And it also very much argues on the idea of family, how family is a key axis, for us at home, as well as how we can think of our workplaces as our extended families. And finally, I make the broader case about that our struggles within the LGBTQ movement are deeply connected with so many other struggles that are happening within our country as well as in other parts of the world. And we need to recognize that, right? So if we are fighting for a more equal world in terms of LGBTQ rights, it is connected with the anti-caste movement, with Black Lives Matter, with students' rights, with the environmental protection movement, with feminism, with so many other social justice movements all around the world, especially at this time post-COVID. We need to be thinking of building bridges of solidarity and love so that we move to this better normal. So I hope you enjoy the book. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. Amita, I know you have lots of questions, so fire away.
Thank you so much, Parmesh. A very good evening to you all. Before we get into the discussion, I hope all of you are safe, taking care of yourselves, following social distancing and wearing masks whenever you're stepping out, because Corona maybe have left our minds, but it has not left in reality. So yeah, so that's said and done. So now see, when it comes to Queeristan for me is like, unicorns jumping over the rainbows or, clouds raining glitter. But all of us know there is more to Queeristan than this. And what is that more is what we need to know. And what is that we need to do to achieve that more is what this discussion is all about. And that's why this discussion is very important. And thank you everybody for being a part of this discussion and having me over. So Parmesh, without any further delay, my first question to you is, in the part 4 of your book, you have recommended a 5-step guide for making workplaces more LGBTI plus inclusive. Now, it's been 2 years. We are living in this post 377 era. So what have we achieved in terms of, corporate inclusion for LGBTI plus? What are the hurdles and what needs to be done? If you can share some details on that with us.
So first of all, I'm just going to show everyone, I've actually made it very simple and done like a pull-out page that you can use. So if you don't read any of the book, you can just go to like this particular page. It is, it's page number 185, and it's got like all the bullet points, right? Super easy. Tear it out, and start using it. And the steps are very much from, ranging from the policies. Thanks, Bachi. The steps range very much from how you can change your policies, which is, anti-discrimination, POSH, dress code, partnership benefits, all the different other benefits that you provide, whether it's gender affirmation, so many other benefits, how you actively recruit LGBTQ people into your organizations. Now there are consultants, there are job fairs, there's a whole universe. How you work on creating that culture within your organization, how you specifically, there's an entire chapter on the specific needs of trans employees, because, trans employees need, they have a different set of circumstances and the needs are fundamentally different as well. And finally, that last bit in that talks about how you then amp it a step ahead and become an advocate for LGBTQ inclusion outside the company, whether it is in participating in pride marches, events, supporting LGBTQ NGOs, film festivals, culture, and all of that, right? So what has happened, thanks. What has happened since the 2018 verdict is that I have noticed, Amita, that companies are actually doing all of these steps. And it's actually incredible. So I think there were many companies before who had already gone on this journey. You used to work with one, right? I'm working with one. There are so many others, whether it's Tata, whether it's the Lalit Group, so many, right? So many companies have gone on this journey before. But what's incredible is that how the 2018 verdict unleashed this positive energy that to me was sitting on the fence. So I've always said that I don't think people in India are inherently homophobic when it comes to LGBTQ, knowledge about our lives and experiences, but there is deep ignorance. And there is a intent and there is tremendous amount of positive energy for people who want to do the right thing. So I think we've seen that in the corporate world for sure. There are so many companies who have kickstarted and who are doing either one or all over at some step, some level of this journey between policies and advocacy, right? So that's a very, very good thing. What I'm also seeing, and I'm actually very excited about, are innovations in the kind of public-private partnerships that are coming about. So Grace Banu, for example, who is collaborating with corporations as well as the Tamil Nadu state government to set up, a transgender-led dairy farming cooperative in that they've called Sandeep Nagar, after the collector who actually helped them set this up. So many other incredible startups are coming about, whether it is a periphery, which is doing placement, whether it is job fairs like Rise. So I'm actually seeing a tremendous amount of energy. I'm seeing a tremendous amount of work on the ground. I'm seeing organizations come up across the length and breadth of the country. Now, my concern is that all this activity and all this intent really needs to be translated into action, right? Another good thing that we're seeing is also so many industry bodies like FICCI, for example, and maybe Radhika will talk more about that, are really committing themselves. And, as you know, bodies like FICCI are not just made of large companies, they're made of many smaller companies across the length and breadth of the country as well. So we're seeing this great positive momentum We are seeing an engagement with different governments in terms of the state. State governments, certainly some are more progressive than others. We're seeing great corporate intent. My concern is that all this intent needs to be translated into action on the ground. And my primary concern here is that LGBTQ individuals need to get hired. We need to get hired in large numbers. All this intent has to translate into actually more jobs, because that is what we need right now, especially within LGBTQ trans individuals as well, because the numbers are very, very dire in terms of trans within that whole alphabet soup, right? So my hope is that all this intent actually leads to many, many more jobs, because that is what I need. And of course, in terms of the law as well, I'm hoping that we have many other legal changes. We have Aparna here, who's way more equipped to talk about the law. So I'm wondering if Aparna might want to share in terms of all the multiple legal changes that we could bring about. But if you ask me, I'm cautiously optimistic about what I'm seeing on the ground right now, Amita.
Great, thanks, Parmesh. The best part or the major change that I have seen is this conversation or this narrative has been normalized. That has been, I think, the major booster, or maybe it has paved way for the changes that really need to happen in terms of legal rights and protection, especially at the workplaces. Now, before I come to Aparna, in the same line, I have another question, because with diversity comes the need for growth. So when we are hiring the LGBTI plus talent, they are also coming with these aspirations and the career progression, right? So would you also like to touch base upon a couple of initiatives or mentoring programs like what we had seen with Pride Circle or Lalit Suri, Keshav Suri Foundation, they have run a couple of mentoring sessions, to groom the LGBTI plus individuals. So would you like to touch base upon a couple of these initiatives also, Parmesh?
Yeah, I think that's really the key. I think, the future is going to be about upskilling. And can we come up with innovative ways where even within organizations, our HR departments can work at hiring more and more queer talent everywhere up and down the value chain. We can work with our CSR teams to work on skill building. So many, for example, the programs that Periphery does, or Pride Circle, or Solidarity Foundation, so many of these incredible NGOs across the country work on skilling, because often when you bring, say, trans people, for example, into the workplace, into the formal, work environment, not everyone has an MBA. People come with different skills. And so these these bridge programs which are a combination of maybe 6 weeks of training, at the end of which, that cohort is placed either within that organization or somewhere else, are a great way of actually going about it. They have worked. I know for sure that whenever a combination of skilling and placement has happened, almost everyone in every cohort has gotten placed as well. So I think the future is very much, we have to stop thinking binary in terms of how we are going to approach this as well. We have to stop thinking it is either this or that, and we have to collaborate, because the large jobs, the large volume of jobs, for example, are going to be in the public sector. So, while we make a big effort in the private sector, I think it's time that people in the private sector, people like us, work together with the public sector, work together with NGOs, work together with incredible advisory organizations like Aparna, Samāna, and we come up with multiple ways of taking the intent of the 2018 judgment and converting it into a much better life for all of us. Livelihoods, life, respect, dignity, media representation. There's so much that we have to do, right? So I think it's only going to come about when we combine when we combine models in terms of how we go about and achieve it. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, one of the programs was also run by Out and Equal, which was LGBTI plus leadership mentoring program. I have attended a couple of sessions, and it was really an amazing, a series of sessions and with a lot of takeaways. And that's where, we have seen she for she, we have seen he for she, and the need of the hour is Z for Z. That's what we need to look at. With that, now I'll come to you, Aparna. You say gender mainstreaming starts with understanding gender inclusion, gender stereotypes, and bias. Yeah. So how can we bring gender lens into all aspects of policy making? And when I say gender lens, here I am going beyond binaries. So we have individuals who identify themselves as third gender or gender fluid or non-binary. So how can we bring in this narrative in the policy formation when it comes to gender?
Right. Thank you, Amita, and very nice to meet all of you on this panel. Before I answer your question, I'd just like to supplement what Parmesh has already said. So, 2018 really opened the gateway, so to speak, for, real progressive change happening at corporate India. But I think one challenge, and I want to start with that challenge, is that a lot of CHROs we meet, they somehow are under the impression that there are no LGBT people in their organization. So they are always looking for two people to step up, identify themselves as out, and then they will think whether they want to make better policies or more inclusive, processes, infrastructure, whatever is required. And I think that, till the extent you don't internalize this issue yourself, you will not be able to create an inclusive workplace. And it's too much to put that burden onto somebody who is from the community to step up and say, hey, I'm here now make policies for us. So I think really the initiatives have to start from the management. They have to be more welcoming in terms of process, infrastructure, or whatever else it has to do. I'm going to link to your specific question on how do you bring the gender lens. So Amita, I am not a big fan of ghettoization. I really think that making individual policies, one for trans inclusion, one for LGBT inclusion, etc., they may actually lead to a lot of falling through the gaps. I will give you one example. Now, every company in India has a maternity benefit policy because there is a law on maternity benefits. It talks about women and it talks about a few months of leave for a woman who is biologically having a child. Now, technically, a trans man, a gentleman who identifies himself as a man, may biologically be able to carry a child. But unless you take that microscope and you go through every policy, initiative, benefit that you have, you will miss out on the detailing. So what having a supra-level trans inclusion or LGBT policy, what it does, it puts out the vision of the organization for sure. But to bring the gender lens really means that you look at everything, every system, infrastructure, process, framework, benefit that you have in the organization. And you look at it from the microscope to see who is getting missed out. Is it the language? Are there certain gateways that restrict people? Or is it some other reason why I'm unable to provide this benefit? And, they also have to think through the permutations. I've had so many conglomerates actually tell me that they will give same-sex, they will give medical insurance benefit to same-sex partners, but they will not give it to heterosexual live-in partners. So my question is that, you have to relook at all your policies and make sure that any stereotypical definitions of family, or which I call gateways, they are watered down so that anybody who is working in your organization is legitimately able to access the same benefits and policies which are there for everybody else. And companies have to get out of this frame of mind where they are weighing everything in terms of money. That, okay, I will open it up 10%, I will not do it. Okay, there may be 5% people from the community. So this benefit I can give, but I can't open it up if there are, say, 100 people. So I think they have to look at the bigger picture. They have to look at all the international studies on business case for diversity. There is, of course, a very well-established legal and social case for diversity as well. And you have to understand that if you have to really get onto that curve of really doing a lot, you have to stop nitpicking. You have to really look at the big picture and make sure each benefit is available to each person, unless, of course, where there are very specific statutory restrictions which still exist.
Yeah, thanks for that, Aparna. And that's where I think representation is very much essential. So, when we talk about especially framework formation or policy formations, representation is very much important to bring in that diversity in terms of thoughts. So Absolutely. Thank you for that.
And just one more thing, if I may add, Amita, I think because I want to make this a more holistic conversation as well. I think Parmesh talked about innovation. I think I completely agree with him. But I think our imagination of LGBT persons and trans persons has to change. When we talk about the jobs we are getting out, you walk into any cafe, you walk into any kind of retail store, those are heavy on human capital. I'm surprised I don't see trans people employed there, right? So our own imagination of what jobs do we think people can do has to change. We have to go beyond only thinking of housekeeping jobs, and I have nothing against housekeeping jobs, but unless our own imagination of people and their abilities change, you will not be able to push the envelope into the frameworks that you create. You have to start seeing the gap. That why are my directors not trans? Why are my directors not LGBT persons? Why is my CEO, CFO, business heads not representative of the community? Because when you start seeing that gap, only then you will create something to fill the gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, the discussion should revolve around skill set. What is it that you're bringing to the table in terms of skill set? Your gender, or other aspects should not take precedence over the skill set. But more often than not, maybe the other aspects are taking precedence, and that's where we don't see the representation as required. The moment I think skill set will become the topic for discussion, equality will automatically kick in. So now with that, yeah. So what we also see these days, now the question is for Parmesh, rainbow capitalism. Unfortunately, what is happening? So there is this Pride Month. Suddenly we'll see organizations having their logos in rainbow colors on social media, panel discussions with tokenism maybe from the LGBTI plus community. And then that is it. So Pride Month has been celebrated, a tick mark has been made in the agenda for inclusion. So we are sorted for the rest of the year. I mean, of course, this is required because conversations are very much essential. But then we need to go beyond this, capitalism. So Parmesh, would you like to dilate upon that a little?
Yes, completely. And this actually also links to a question that Bachi has asked, all of us as well. So it's very, very linked. I was actually trying to, I wanted to read something from the book, but maybe later. I think it's spot on. In fact, I have a whole chapter called "But No Token Rainbows, Please. We Want Your Jobs, Not Your Instagram Filters." And it actually talks about exactly this, Bachi, what you once asked in the chat as well, right? How do you take this tokenism and make it real? I have no issues with organizations who are doing rainbow filters, who are celebrating International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, or Pride parades, or putting out ads on social media, etc. I think it's very good. It's visibilization. It's very, very good. My thing is, as an organization, you should be doing that after you've done all the other things, not before. And there are so many organizations that we know of, and we've written about these in the book as well, who've done the ads and who think that by releasing an ad, you've done your work. Meanwhile, their own employees don't have benefits. Meanwhile, there's discrimination happening within their own organizations. So they've done none of the other steps, but they've done the kind of rainbow or the pink washing and all of that. And you know what? Your queer customers, as well as your employees and other stakeholders, will call you out for it. So you might as well do the work and reap the benefits instead of doing this kind of tokenism and then being called out for it and then being embarrassed about it. Because we're living in a world of social media. We're living in a world with Gen Z and millennials who do research about the organizations they want to work for and they want to buy from. If you do the real work in investing in your policies, in hiring queer people, in sensitizing your employees, in supporting LGBTQ culture, the benefits that you will reap are so much more than doing the shoddy kind of, pink washing and then being called out for it. Just to give you some numbers, $200 billion is the size of India's LGBTQ market. $200 billion with a B. The World Bank did a report about 6 years ago that estimated that the cost of homophobia in our country at that time was $32 billion. That's 32, which is about 1% of the GDP that year. Now, we know where we are in terms of our economy, right? We want a GDP bump. Let's just be more inclusive and let's all make more money and become more innovative and just move up. by doing the work, right? You do all of this, you reap these rewards when you invest in queer talent, and that queer talent then innovates for you and with you. You invest in policies, you invest in doing the right thing to do, and your queer customers buy your products, like they did with Subaru, like we're doing with the Lalit group of hotels, for example, in India, right? They've hired 100 LGBTQ people, and so there are so many loyalists who will only stay at the Lalit. Right? As you sow, so shall you reap. It's not as you like Instagram post, so shall you reap. You have to do the work. So I have no issues with any kind of rainbowgiri, but it has to be accompanied with deep intent. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing so much of that. And I use this analogy in the book, which I draw from Mona El-Tahawi, whom I love, feminist icon Mona El-Tahawi. And she's referenced other people as well. And, when we were having this conversation in the context of feminism, and even, she was like, she told me, she's like, I'm just tired of eating these crumbs all the time. There is a big cake. I want a big piece of the cake. I don't want crumbs. In fact, I want to co-bake a bigger cake with everyone. And I think as queer people, we deserve that, right? We deserve to have bigger pieces of this cake, and we deserve to make bigger cakes. And as I've outlined in the book, it's really win-win. If we all bake a bigger cake and we all have bigger pieces of it, we will all be full. Instead of some people just having so much cake that they don't know what to do with it, and so many others kind of, looking at the crumbs. That's not very fair. So I'm all for organizations going out and blowing the rainbow trumpets after the work has been done, right? Aparna, I don't know if you want to add to that. But yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think to just supplement what Parmesh has already said, there are no shortcuts. Let's be very clear. Culture change, deep-seated interventions take time. And if you look at any parallel, you can look at women's rights, you can look at women at the workforce, you can look at representation of any marginalized group, so to speak. It will take years for full integration. And I think if you are, and as Parmesh rightly said, when we go to management schools and we talk to them or we talk to applicants, they are very curious now to know what kind of benefits and policies do companies have. So I think as a mature organization, you have to go beyond platitudes. You have to really invest in the culture and look at, some of the companies we advise as D&I partners. They have been doing work on D&I for almost 100 years. And they are still committed to it because they understand the deep level of intersectionality. As Parmesh started with that note on intersectionality, it could be caste, it could be religion, it could be LGBT, it could be socioeconomic backgrounds. There are so many nuances to tap into that, one advertisement somewhere is not going to fix it. And lasting change, it's also, we have to be humble enough to say that we have a lot to learn from each community member. Only when they become a part of the system, they are really integrated and they have that voice to say, let's change this, or this is not working out. That's where you will really leverage, both on technical aspects and on internal HR aspects. And that will take time, and one advertisement is not going to fix it. In fact, I must tell you with a word of caution that if you're going to put out the social image of an inclusive organization and people come and apply to you and get selected and your processes are not ready, you will create some kind of, harm to that person or goodwill damage. If your systems are not ready, if your other employees or workforce is not equally sensitized, they have not been trained, you will actually harm somebody. So we have to be more cautious, more thoughtful about what we are doing. And as Parmesh rightly said, please start with something. Put your policies and processes in place, then hire, and then just go on to that journey of symbiotic learning and improvement, because really sky is the limit to get to that point.
Yeah, and that's where, Aparna, you coined a very important term, intersectionality, because unknowingly what is also happening these days is organizations have ERGs, employee resource groups, for every aspect of diversity. So there is this ERG for specially able colleagues, there is this ERG for LGBTI+, ERG for generational diversity, parents and family network, and then these ERGs work in silos, which compartmentalizes the workforce, maybe, further dividing the workforce. So that's where my question to you is, how can we achieve intersectionality? As in, why intersectionality is important, and what can organizations do to ensure they achieve the intersectionality?
Absolutely. So I think intersectionality is important because we have to understand that there are such diverse identities around us that it is impossible to put a formula to say there are 5 people and this is how they will be. And if you really look at, we have moved on actually. We in fact, through our trainings, we are teaching multiculturalism these days. Where you have people from such diverse ethnicities, race, nationalities, language, socioeconomic backgrounds, customs, etc., working together. So I think one has to be humble enough, and I keep using that word, that we can't pretend as employers that we know everything. So the point of intersectionality is to say every person is unique. You can't have a formula to define people. And everybody brings something unique, which comes from their roots or their lived experiences onto the table. And you have to really leverage that diversity. And I'm not only saying it in a commercial sense, I'm also saying it in that intangible sense of it's a good place to work. I feel happy coming to work, and I'm really a happy, motivated person at work. So, that intersectionality, once you put that lens on, you realize that, there is so much more to do. There will be specific needs to create equitable workplaces. And only when you get that direct input from people who are living that, will you be able to integrate that, reverse integrate that into your systems or processes. Because like it or not, all our systems and policies are made for majority representative groups across the world, right? And then you start tweaking the system little by little to adjust. And that's where I have a problem, because there is no holistic feedback going to say, look, this does not work, let's change it. There's a time you have to stop tweaking and fitting in and doing jugaad. You really have to create fresh systems in one way. And in terms of how can you do it, so I per se don't have a problem with ERGs, because I really think that a collective space where you can have a collective number standing with you or negotiating for you or just sharing experiences, right? And sometimes it may not be optically visible to some of us who may be highly privileged in terms of our backgrounds, but these social spaces are deeply compromised. So ERGs give you that safe social space. I don't have a problem with ERGs. But yes, I would love to see how ERGs can come together and really exchange their learnings, and also have cross memberships with ERGs, and really leverage that kind of thinking that you have in the organization. And lastly, I think, you can't have ERGs for everything. If I were to look globally at the kind of identities we work with, it's impossible to have an ERG for everything. So more than while your ERGs can really leverage, communication, at some point of time, you have to have more open spaces at the workplace. And I just don't mean the physicality of an open space, but I mean shared safe spaces where people, irrespective of the background, can come forward and have a conversation and really work together to make changes in the organization. And that's really where these safe spaces, you can call it a 0 hour or whatever you want to call it, this is really where the ideas and the feedback really starts coming forward.
A lot of questions are also coming our way. So maybe I'll blend in the questions also in the discussion now. So Aparna, again, with you only, it's because the question is more from the legality perspective. So actually there are two sides to the question. One is about anti-sexual harassment and prevention of sexual harassment POSH policies at the workplace. So do these policies really provide redressal to the LGBTI plus community, especially for the third gender or gender fluid individuals at the workplace? That's question number one. And with the same aspect, Somraj from the audience has also asked a question from the legality perspective. He's saying his query is about making benefits like same-sex partners insurance possible. Is there any legal declaration required for them to avail this like that? So what are your views on this? Yeah.
So there's 3 questions, and I'll go one by one. So there is a POSH Act, or the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, which talks about harassment of women. Having said that, the law gives you the bare minimum. Nothing stops a company from adding on top of that. So for example, we have maternity benefit under law. We don't have a paternity law in the private sector, but most companies have a paternity leave. So similarly for POSH, though the law is limited to women, most progressive companies today have a gender neutral POSH policy, which means that the same process and the same avenue for resolution of a complaint is available to any person irrespective of their gender or sexual orientation. In cases where we have drafted such policies for companies, we also make sure the detailing is worked out to reflect that. So it wouldn't just be about sexual harassment, but what constitutes sexual harassment, you can describe it. If you're outing somebody without their consent, or you're making a remark on their sexual orientation, that would also be sexual harassment. So, you have to be a little bit more descriptive and make it more clear through the wording of the policy that sexual harassment for any person, irrespective of gender or sexual orientation, will not be permitted and will be a disciplinary issue in the organization. For those companies who yet do not have gender neutral POSH policies, I would also request you to look at your general HR code of conduct, which is a document a lot of people just forget about. Because even though the POSH policy, because it is not gender neutral for your company, may talk about harassment of women, I think any kind of other harassment should ideally fall into your HR code of conduct. So look at both documents. But I really think there's a very strong case for companies to come forward and take the right step and make their POSH policies progressively gender neutral and think through the entire mechanism and make sure that every avenue it has been innovatively drafted to bring this element in. To come to the second question on insurance, group insurance or medical insurance is something given by companies as a benefit, and many companies have a partner declaration process for compliance with many laws. For example, certain investment banks, for your insider trading, you have to declare who your partner is, right? And or who your dependents are, who you're living with. So I'm trying to, again, because my personal aim is that look at your existing systems and, there are answers there. So whatever process the company follows to just identify who the partner is, not so much to dictate, but just to know factually. I think that same process when you're doing for insider trading, when you're doing for any other benefit, you can do the same thing for an LGBT partner as well. There is no challenge in that. The only slight caveat there is that whatever process you follow for all your compliances for partner benefits, please make sure that, confidentiality is maintained. It's not something that, just lands up in the accounts team or somewhere and then it's public information. Because we also are moving towards a very strict data privacy regime where, taking the declarations on gender or sexual orientation is also regulated there. So please look at your entire processes internally, see what is the bare minimum required to be disclosed only for the actual benefit to accrue. And that should all be it. I am not personally a big fan of over formalizing it, because I think if you over formalize, as much as I respect the fact that there has to be some paperwork for companies to identify and give the benefit, I think it has to be the bare minimum reasonable documentation and nothing more than that. And lastly, one final point is on insurance is please talk to your insurance companies. I actually pulled out a list of 50 companies who had talked about same-sex partner benefit on their websites. And they said we had tied up with so-and-so insurance company. And when we were speaking to the insurance companies on, best products to put out in the market, and we were advising them, we realized nobody had changed the insurance policy. So you can say you're giving same-sex partner benefit, but if your policy is still using the word family, somebody in an unfortunate situation will land up in hospital and not have access to that claim because your policy eventually has not been tweaked. So both your internal process has to be made simple and facilitative, and whoever your third-party service providers are, that last mile connectivity, as I call it, or that microscope, which I keep using that word, that has to be seen to ensure that end to end, there is no roadblock or hurdle that comes in the process. And that has to be worked out with the insurance company as well, so that they don't ask more, unnecessary questions, etc. Once they're given the name of the person and they're given that these are the 5 persons to which this policy benefit is available, that should all be that they need to process the claim without creating more and more paperwork or questions or really roadblocks in this process.
Okay, thanks Aparna. Now with that, I'll move on to Parmesh. The question aligns with what Tanay has also asked. How can we increase the LGBTI plus leadership? Because presently in India, we hardly see any. And when it comes to driving inclusion, it's always top down. So Parmesh, the question for you is, how can we increase this LGBTI plus leadership?
Thanks. And that also, in a sense, segues with Amit's question of merit. That was asked on the chat and also I think in the Q&A, and I think both are very, very important, right? So first, I actually want to just talk a little bit about the attitude with which we are doing what we're doing, right? I think it's very important for any organization which is going on this D&I journey to go on it with an attitude that we are doing this not out of any sense of altruism, although that would be very, very nice, because we do want to create a better world. But if we are doing this as an organization, it is ultimately in our enlightened self-interest. Being inclusive, whichever dimension of inclusion you look at it, PWD, caste, gender, sexuality, age, whichever dimension you look at it, being inclusive is ultimately in your interest. So you have to approach it as, it is in my interest as an organization to be inclusive, because I'm going to make more money, I'm going to innovate, I'm going to get the best talent. It is win-win scenario for everyone. And the biggest win is me, because I will benefit so much, right? Of course, queer people will benefit. We will get jobs, we will have a better standard of life and all. But ultimately, the biggest beneficiary is the organization. So as an organization, if you approach it with this understanding, it makes everything else much, 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 much easier, right? Especially in a post-COVID world. How are we going to get? We don't know when this pandemic will end. We do know that when this ends, the world is going to be very different, right? How are we going to innovate for today's pressing needs as well as tomorrow's new reality? We're not going to innovate if everyone in our organization looks, acts, talks, thinks like everyone else, right? We are going to innovate when we have organizations that truly reflect the world which is outside. And in the world which is outside, 4 to 10% of people are queer. There are so many PWDs. There's a wide range of races and so on. So our organizations need to reflect this world which is outside with the talent that we have, so that we can serve the customers and innovate for their needs, right? And it is ultimately to our benefit as an organization. So having said that, I want to touch upon, leadership, certainly, right? So with this as the background, it is vital for organizations to have leaders who are also very, very diverse and different. Because, a lot of decisions are made in boardrooms. And boardrooms, even today, with best efforts, most of Indian leading companies, right, will maximum have 4 to 10% at senior leadership of women. Whereas the population of women in general is so much more, right? So no wonder then that so many business decisions that are made might not always be in the best interest of women, because we don't, our leadership, our top level leadership everywhere is not reflecting that reality, right? So how do we get more leaders? You cultivate them within your organization through your policies and practices. You make your organization so good that talent from other organizations joins you. You actually go out and seek. So for senior positions, etc., you make it a mandate that we are filling this board position, or we are filling this, VP and above position, and we really want this person to be complementary to the people we have already. So, what dimension of diversity, intersectional diversity can be higher, so that our senior leadership, is able to respond to, to the changing times. You go out and you look for that. And this brings me to this question of merit, right? Which is raised. And this merit question is always almost, in fact, one wonders when it comes up, right? Because when you talk about, let's create a more equal world, we are not saying that we are creating an unequal world for the people who are already benefiting from it. That is not the intention at all. All we are saying is that we want the same rights and same benefits to be shared by everyone. So at Godrej, for example, where I work, LGBT people, we have same-sex partner benefits for our partners. It doesn't mean that straight people don't have for their partners. If you happen to be straight and you work at Godrej, you will also have the benefits. These benefits are not only for queer people. Our straight people at Godrej also share the same benefits. And this is what is important to understand. When you create this more equal world, you're not taking away from anyone. You're just widening to include, right? So that's one very important thing to do. It doesn't mean that if LGBT people or PWD or whichever dimension you want get certain benefits, the other people are not. That's number one, right? Number two is about equity versus equality, right? And you do want to strive for equity, which means because there are people who've been discriminated against so much, structurally and otherwise, you do want to maybe think of how you measure talent in a more holistic way. You do want to like think about how you can positively discriminate and include people from a range of backgrounds, but talent and possibilities. You do look at skills that someone may have, that they may have gained in another experience, in another job or in another experience, and see how you can translate that. I think it's very vital as you keep on, having more and more diverse populations join your workforce. I think you have to look at how you measure merit also. And as an organization, strive towards equity. Otherwise, all these things are going to remain on paper and not translate into actual action in terms of having a large number of people join the workforce. And this is true for senior leadership. This is true for everyone down the line as well.
That's what. So this discussion revolves around hiring. So, you briefly touch base upon job fair. So this question also aligns with one of the attendees. How can organizations go about LGBTI plus hiring? Because it's again revolves around meritocracy versus representation, and then there is this sensitive aspect of somebody's sexual orientation or gender identity, which is very confidential. So in an interview, asking somebody what's your sexual orientation is not the correct way forward. And then the other aspect to it is, how can we reach out to the LGBTI plus individuals who are not in the urban space, who are remotely located and who are really, struggling for opportunities? So how can organizations go for hiring, Parmesh? And Aparna, I'll come back with the same question to you. So first, Parmesh, if you can add your views on it.
Sure. I think there's multiple things that organizations can do because talent is everywhere. So I think, first, don't just think that you are hiring LGBTQ people for certain roles. You should indicate, you should flag, and there's multiple ways of signaling. My friend Ali Potia at McKinsey, whom I've quoted in the book, says, for any role, you can signal that you are queer friendly. It could be a rainbow border around every job profile that you put out. It could be a small asterisk that says, we are trying to be an inclusive organization on multiple dimensions. We especially encourage members of X, Y, Z community to apply, right? It could be multiple forms of signaling. We at Godrej, when we recruit, when we go from MBA campus to MBA every summer, we make sure that one of the talks is always an LGBT inclusion talk, right? Out of those 500 students that are there at every campus, we know 4 to 10% of them are LGBTQ. But beyond that, almost all those 500 today are LGBTQ, not LGBTQ, they have friends. So a lot of straight people also incidentally want to work at companies that are respectful of LGBTQ. It's not just LGBTQ. So when you are recruiting, you're not just recruiting queer talent, you're also recruiting straight people. Because you show them that you are inclusive, they will consider you over someone else, right? So there's multiple things you can do. You can do signaling for all jobs. You can, work with, attend pride fairs and so on. But I think in smaller towns, etc., the best way is to work with local community organizations. They have the pulse of what is happening, right? So if you are in Chhattisgarh, there are great, Raipur Pride, there are incredible organizations, right? Across our country, whether it is Chutikaran and Grace Banu and Trans Rights Now, whether it is Queerabad, whether it is Queer Allah and Kerala, whether it is All, or, there's so many organizations across this country who are working at the grassroots. As an organization, if you want to really go across the length and breadth in smaller towns, work with these community organizations, work with these NGOs, we'd be more than happy to share, to help you upskill, to partner with you in training, and to get this message across. So there's so much you can do. Thankfully, the entire network has been built over the past 20 years. Folks like Aparna have been ceaselessly working on the ground to build this network. there are 20 consultants you can hire right now. And any aspect you want to look at. Queer mental health, there are professionals. Hiring, there are professionals. You want someone to come in and help you sensitize your employees, there are professionals. Just go out there, work with them, work with the professionals, work with organizations on the ground. There's no excuse, honestly. You just need to get started.
Yeah, now there is this other sensitive aspect to this hiring, which Aparna, I need your views on. So considering the trans bill and, how flawed it is and how it's invading an individual's privacy, we will have individuals, let's say, who have their gender as T, third gender, or let's say a person who is aspiring to transition, but because of these complications around the trans bill, have not got the legal documents updated or reflecting the correct gender of that individual. So how can organizations go ahead when it comes to hiring these individuals?
So a couple of things, and I'll start with supplementing what Parmesh says. Hiring is a very key focus area of my work. And, I really bring a lot of critical, feedback to hiring. And, for example, you can have the best accountant sitting in rural India. She may not have the best English, but she may have the best mathematical or accounting skills. So I think basically, and I don't want to generalize, but that's my own view of how hiring happens, is that we don't understand people's core skills, and we don't understand the difference between core skills and ancillary skills. If somebody is a good accountant, go ahead and hire them. You can teach the English once they have joined the organization. So we have to really understand the interplay of intersectionality and understand that our hiring process should not unintentionally create more barriers than keeping it much wide open. So if you're only going to hire through technology platforms, or you're only going to hire through, okay, this CV looks the most polished and best worded CV, you're not going to find the right candidate. So we have to really understand what is the core skill in the job description that you need in the person, and what are the other things which can be built up through training. That's one. Second, I think on hiring, what's important, and these are long conversations. I'm just giving you the 30,000 feet, description. Second is, it's a lot of unconscious bias in the hands that do the hiring, whether they are the recruiters, whether they are your hiring managers, your HR business partners. At every level, there will be leakage in the CVs that come forward. We actually devised a very interesting parameter because we do a lot of D&I assessments for organizations, where we actually made a Excel sheet, MIS, where I could actually point out which hiring manager has the highest level of unconscious bias. So we just we had very critical questions or, parameters we devised on CVs received, hired, etc., etc. So you have to understand that you have to train your hiring hands much, much better, and not just on the basics, but on progressive ways to address unconscious bias. Only then will they be able to differentiate between core skill and value other skill, and also bring in the right person for the right job. And I think the third thing, which is deeply misunderstood, and I get this from almost all the CHROs I meet, is, oh my God, diversity means no merit. I think, let's get this idea out of our heads. Diversity does not mean you're compromising merit. And then let's not use merit and use it as a flashy word to deny equal opportunity. Because unless you have given somebody opportunity, it is not okay to sit there and judge whether they have the ability to do something or not. I mean, look at the amount of youngsters, and these are heartwarming stories when you see some young guy who is a guard somewhere, who's sitting and studying after his duty, and he tops some entrance exam. Those are really examples in India to see that if you give opportunity, people really have the ability to, perform at the same level that you do. So, you can't judge merit before giving opportunity. And I think to come to your last question on the Trans Act, and I think everybody should know that the Act and the rules are now notified. And if your company is not complying, that's a problem. You have to come forward and comply with the Trans Act and the rules. So I think the Act has two portions to it, Amita. One is, of course, the whole governmental process set out about how do you identify your gender and how do you change your gender and the paperwork around that. And of course, a lot of trans individuals have rightly given their feedback on that process. But for companies in India who want to hire, I don't think they need to follow that same hyper-technical process of identification. So I think, even in the past 10 years, companies who have hired trans people people who joined them with a gender and then chose to transition, or people who had transitioned or were in the process of transition. You have to use your mind and look at the paperwork. I have seen so many instances where, and I'm sorry for getting into detail, I'm cisgender. My own PAN card, my father's name has one alphabet different, right? And any place I go to, that becomes a problem. Right? So I think all our processes are so hyper technical and they defy logic sometimes. You want everything to be so bureaucratic that you just do not want to apply your mind that if there are 5 other documents which has the right alphabet and one has a typographical error, you can take an affidavit and just close it at that. Now, when you are unable to accept one alphabet difference, I can imagine how painfully difficult companies would be for trans persons. And I think that's where the HR has to step up. And I got a question on the chat, Aparna, what process are you talking about? This is the process I'm talking about. That, you've cleaned up your hiring process, but when you onboard, are you going to be horribly painful with people for every scrap of document? I'm not saying you lower the requirements, but if somebody has a class 12 mark sheet and the name is different, but they also have subsequent documentation to say my identity was this, now this is my dead name, this is my new name, I'm willing to swear on affidavit, and they have subsequent documents, please recognize that documentation. So, that's what I said. The actual process has to be empathetic. It has to be sensitive. It has to be done in a manner where you're actually applying your mind and you don't make it so horrendously bureaucratic that it becomes a barrier for anyone who comes to apply to you. And I'm sorry if I'm sounding like I feel strongly, but I do feel strongly about this because, you have to apply your mind. So many times I get, oh, this is a standard form, we can't change it. I'm sorry, there is nothing standard form. Standard form means you're not ready to apply your mind, right? And there is nothing that you cannot get an affidavit for. You can't get somebody to just sign on stamp paper and say, okay, I'm telling you, this is me, these are my past documents, that's it. And nobody's here to commit fraud. If people want to commit fraud, you will find enough cisgender people also committing fraud in the company. They will give you a fake mark sheet somewhere or something. So then if there is 1%, and I'm not talking about trans people, anybody who's committed fraud, then there's a breach of contract, you terminate them. But don't create those barriers in paperwork and in the process that comes in. And if you can involve somebody from the community or a proper consultant who can work you through the balance, we understand legal requirements. We understand corporate requirements of, we don't want ambiguity. We don't want, things which are not documented. We understand that requirement to keep it kosher. But you have to apply your mind and make processes which are true to reality and not just 30,000 feet in the air and not true to reality at all. And this is something I see a lot of my friends who come from, certain castes where they don't want to put their surname out. I have so many friends, their kids now go to school and they have chosen not to use a surname because they want to clearly say, we don't want our caste identity out. We don't believe in this anymore. And schools don't let them fill that admission form without a second name. So I think all our processes really have to be looked into. What is necessary and what is just, vestige of the past. That's something we have to look at and reform.
Yeah. Thanks, Aparna, for making it so simplistic to apply your mind and brain when it comes to hiring, to not get shackled by the technicalities of it. Thank you for it. Now we are really running short of time. So with this now, I'll hand it over to Radhika to give the closing remarks. Yeah, over to you, Radhika.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for such a great session. And in particular, Amita, I'd like to thank you and the group for your great questions, and Parmesh and Aparna for your passion and also your deep expertise and practical realities of how to actually make change. I've had the honor and the privilege of knowing Parmesh for a long time, and then more recently working with Aparna and Parmesh on the FICCI D&I task force. And, Aparna, especially from you, when I hear in your voice the passion you have for the subject, and then also really the deep expertise of how to sort of troubleshoot any question, how to basically handle all the objections and just not take no for an answer. As a queer leader myself, it's inspiring for me to hear from you because I have only heard all the objections. And despite being a lesbian leader of a company myself, I have not been able to make the changes that I would like to see in my own organization, and that despite having all the structural power on my side. So to hear you give these very, very helpful that, okay, no, this is how you answer this objection. For me, that has been the great gift of this panel. So thank you, Aparna, so much for that. And Parmesh, I am definitely part of your fan club. Thank you for taking forward this conversation, for continuously widening it and deepening it. So widening it across groups of different allies, like Asia Society, where the reach may be so much more than some of the other groups we speak to, but also for deepening the conversation. Because now having had this panel, I wish we could have a similar type panel with so many HR forums that I can think of that are nothing to do with sort of the queer groups that we often talk to, right? Now, I think the best part of this panel is that we are truly now going beyond the groups that we know, not just preaching to the choir, as they say, but talking to, straight allies beyond. So it's been hugely informative. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your passion. And I hope that some of the audience are equally inspired like me, and will take the message forward and make some change in your own organization, no matter where that is. Thank you very much. And thank you, Asia Society, for hosting this.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you all for attending.